Good evening. So I will be presenting the case study that was done by Yoshimasa Masuda, and this was done in a global corporations. And this case study titles Adaptive Integrated Digital Architecture Framework Risk Management Case. So let's go through the topics. So first is the introduction, and then we will have the chance to assess first the architecture board in the architecture board, and at the same time we have to understand the GDTC model for knowledge management on digital platforms, as well as for the social collaboration model and the resiliency architecture model, STRMM model for digital transformation. And then we go on to the evaluation and analysis, and after that we discuss the verification and summary of this case study. And then we'll have to check for the evaluation of strategy elements to mitigate the risk in digital transformation. And lastly, the conclusion. All right, so for this case study, the author proposes one framework and multiple kinds of models. So the framework that was proposed was the Adaptive Integrated Digital Architecture Framework, while the rest of the models are the Global Digital Transformation Communication Model, the Social Collaboration Model, and the Strategic Risk Mitigation Model. Okay, so the author found existing enterprise architecture frameworks to be inappropriate to achieve the digital transformation of the global corporation. So while the necessity of implementing the enterprise architecture in parallel with the long-term in the era of having implementing a cloud or mobile IT or digital IT based projects. So yeah, so the author hypothesized the process of architecture review and evaluation with mitigating risk, and also verified them in the case study in a global organization. Okay, so the author of this chapter has named the enterprise architecture framework suitable for the era of digital IT. So, so this framework is called the Adaptive Integrated Digital Framework. So, but before we delve into the framework, we have first to assess or go with the context phase while referencing to the defining phase. So during the assessment and architecture review, during the assessment and architecture review, the role of the architecture board is also important because they review the initiation and the related architecture for the IT projects. So with that, we have first to identify the roles, the responsibilities and the tasks of the architecture board. So basically, these board are a group of people that governs architecture. So in terms of the responsibility, the first one is the operational functional aspect and the viability of solution architecture with enterprise level standard conformance are assessed properly, and the project's related architecture risk should be coped with. The second responsibility is the architecture integration issues across the information system or the information technology organization are assessed and reviewed and resolved. And lastly, the enterprise architecture risks are assessed and mitigated timely and consistently. While the specific tasks of this board should be reviewed, they should review the solution architecture, the standard common platform of new IS or IT projects involving new technology, as well as endorse signed architecture of new IS or IT projects for the month. And lastly, the share architecture strategy in each department's initiatives and their status. Okay, so this architecture board performs their architecture review regarding their solution architecture on the basis of this following evaluation criteria. So the first criteria will be reviewing the enterprise level conformance, which they have to align with architecture roadmap, standard, and each architecture principle. The second evaluation criteria is the functional aspect, which they have to clarify the solutions, architecture specs, integration points with standard master data. And the third evaluation criteria is the operational aspect, which they have to alignment, which there will be alignment with the service level, security design, and privacy system availability. And lastly is the viability. So this one pertains to the application rationalization, risk or countermeasures, data migration, and testing strategy. Okay, so the author proposed the assessment meta model in architecture board, as you can see here in the figure, although it's kind of blurry. But this is based on the process and description in the case study of the global corporation. So basically, we can see here the architecture board as the initial part of the process. And then they have to define, then go to the criteria phase. And as they go along with evaluating their action items, identifying their risks, and later on, they should be able to identify their mitigation strategy. So this is just an example of how they propose this assessment in a global corporation. Okay, so another model that was proposed was the GDTC model for the knowledge management on digital platform. So before we delve into this model, we have to understand the various knowledge sharing within the company. So uh, basically, the intermediary knowledge model, this is a knowledge sharing through intermediary knowledge can effectively, and efficiently promote global communication as a result of digital IT transformation. So by means of, corporate bodies conducting global communication accompanied by digital IT transformation. And aside from that, there are various communication model that we can apply. First is the linear information model, in which the communication is from the speaker going to the receiver. And the second model is the convergence model, in which there is an iterative process occurs until a mutual understanding of the information has been reached. So with that, the author proposes this global digital transformation communication model, in which it promotes the digital transformation in the global community, which consists of three layers. So the first layer is the tacit knowledge group. The second is the intermediary knowledge group. And the last one is the explicit knowledge group. Okay, so we delve into the deep dive on the elements of the layers in the GDTC model. So on the left side, we have the three knowledge group, the tacit, the intermediary, and the explicit. And we have here the group nodes, the media, documentation, and example deliverables. Okay, so for the TKG group, or for the tacit knowledge group, it contains roles for exchanging tacit knowledge, of course, and its group node is human, and it's usually generated through telephone or web conferences, or yeah, and it also appears to does I mean it does not generate documentation for global communication, so we assume that it does not create any formal documentation. Okay, but the sample deliverables for this TKG is like discussions or meetings. However, it does not always produce a tangible deliverables that can be observed or that can be stored. While for the intermediary knowledge group, it performs the role of exchanging intermediary knowledge, and its group node is basically the portal, or the portal, the contents. While the media is usually the like company portal, or if they have a social networking services, as well as the email. Okay, so the IKG, or the intermediary knowledge group, provides just-in-time documentation. So just-in-time documentation refers to necessary knowledge becoming documents when global community members communicate with each other using a computer-mediated communication tools. The deliverables for IKG are web conference, social network services, as well as email logs. And the last one is the role of the EKG, or the explicit knowledge group. This is for the exchange, of course, the explicit knowledge, and the group node of EKG is document. And um, yeah, in terms of the media, so we usually have a document management services whose functions are historical management, enterprise document searching, and document file sharing. For the documentation, EKG provides full documentation to global community members, and the sample deliverables are the conference results, the architecture board result and the architecture guidelines. All right, so this is the proposed GDTC model with knowledge sharing. So in a traditional global company or communication, we usually employ only the TKG and EKG in the knowledge process. However, a great deal of communication during the meetings is necessary among stakeholders. So this shows that the proposed GDTC model adds IKG. So meaning we incorporated intermediary knowledge group for this model. So the knowledge processes in IKG consists of open and agile communication in portal, in social networking services, and emails, as well as the other computer-mediated communication tools that facilitate within the organization. So yeah, so basically the IKG records a meeting, the SNS, the email logs, which are not formal documents, but it's still very effective for effective knowledge for global communication. Okay, so we move on to the social collaboration model. Okay, so basically this is a model that provides a global communication steps on the enterprise portal. So this is like a workflow depending on which platform that they are using. So it provides different types of requests, references, consolidation, confirmation, evaluation, and understanding that each new project planning document was made or submitted and reviewed or evaluated in the architecture board. And lastly is the resiliency architecture model or the STRMM model for digital transformation. Okay, so as a result of the investigating tasks of the architecture review by the architecture board, in this case, they confirmed that the project planning documents of almost all new IS or ID projects have been submitted to the architecture board. So this board performs an architecture review on the basis on the evaluation criteria that we have mentioned earlier. It was found out as well that the risk connected to each action item and defined equivalent solution for each risk and started risk management process with architecture board based on the proper mitigation strategy. So the mitigation strategy of this risk can lead to resiliency in the digital transformations. So hence, they propose the resiliency architecture model, the strategic risk mitigation model for digital transformation in this case study. Okay, so we move on to the evaluation and analysis of this case study. So one of the goal here is also to identify uh, the risk categories. So as a result of their data analysis, uh, and also based on the observation for about 1 year and 8 months, they have identified 118 items or risk, and they categorize it into 10 risk categories. Okay. So the revealed risk categories for digital IT are presented here. So we have here the security, which pertains to the information security, privacy, cybersecurity, security architecture, security solutions, user authentication, and access control in digital IT system. The second highest is the architecture conformance. So this is the risk mainly connected with solution architecture conformance for digital IT systems in terms of the business, the process, technical, and the sourcing strategy. And the third highest risk category is the technology architecture, which this is the risk mainly connected with technology architecture and the target architecture in digital related platform and mobile application, digital IT systems, and others. The fourth highest is the project management. So this is the risk mainly related to the project management, the project scope, as well as the cost structure, project scheme, and the project planning and definition. The fifth is the compliance and validation, which this is the risk mainly connected with compliance and validation, as well as with the software development lifecycle related compliance and other. It also includes some digital IT related vendors if there are GXP validations and other testings. And the sixth is the application architecture, which is mainly related to the application system architecture and the target architecture, including the roadmap of the digital IT system. The seventh is the data architecture, which mainly focus on the data, of course, the data architecture, including the data migration strategy. The eighth is the application rationalization. So this pertains to the risk mainly related with the application system rationalization in digital IT areas to prevent from increasing the number of application in vain. And the ninth is the strategic alignment. So this risk mainly connected with alignment with IT strategy and architecture strategy in digital IT areas and high-level target architecture and roadmap as well. So the last is the system development. So this focuses with the system development and enterprise system implementation, as well as with the smooth transition to the new enterprise system. So if we have identified the risk categories, we have also to identify the solution categories. So um, each solution to mitigate this 118 risks. So as I mentioned earlier, they have identified 118 risks, um, and they have to put a solution for each of those risks. So they have identified this through the risk assessment process as well as through their analysis. So they come up with these 10 solution categories that can help to mitigate the identified risk. So the number one is the employees. So this solution pertains to the assigning of proper employees. The second is the top management. So this solution connected with the top management involvement in any of the IT or IS project. The third is the application architecture. So this pertains to the verification of appropriate application architecture and integration standard. And the fourth is the project scope definition. So it's more of, yeah, of course, it's more particularly on the definition of the project scope. And the fifth is the system. So it's more focused on the system customization, modification, optimization, and decommission. The sixth is focus on the implementation process. This is mainly for the management of implementation process. And the next is the technology architecture, which focus on the verification of appropriate technology architecture and interface standard. The next is the security architecture, which verifies the appropriate security architecture and security solution adoption. The next is the vendor contract definition, which this is a solution connected with the contract with the system vendor. And last one is the system vendor, which is a solution connected with the vendor support or any consultant or any external parties. Okay, so since we have already identified the risk as well as the possible solutions, so the author proposes to have an interrelation between the solution and risk. Okay, so they try to, after analyzing the risk and solution, they map the solution categories onto the risk categories. So in this figure, some solution categories are cope with many risk categories. Okay. So there's just a note here that if you see a solid line, it denotes direct correspondence between the solution and the risk categories more than 3 times. And if you see a dotted line, shows a direct correspondence between the solution and the risk categories more than once. So the reason why we have to have this kind of interrelation in order to identify the risk as well as the mitigation that we will have to do for each of the risks. Okay, so in order to verify that risk categories and solution categories, they have come up with this. I hope you can see this one. This is so very small. Okay, so as I mentioned earlier, we discussed about the solution as well as the risk. So these are those items listed here. So on here on top are the implementation of the cloud and mobile IT or the specific application layer, as well as the mitigation strategy that needs to be implemented depending on the risk and uh, depending on the risk assessment and risk occurrence. So you will see here that the bullets represent the level of solution occurrence adopted by the architecture board. So if you see two shaded circle, it means that it's extremely high. And if you see one shaded circle, it means high. And if you see half shaded circle, it's medium. And if you see a circle with no shade, it means low. So that's how we can measure the risk for each of the risk categories that we have identified. Okay, so we move on to the valuation results. So yeah, so if we have identified the risk, we should have a mitigation for that, risk mitigation. So one that was identified was the role assignment. So in this role assignment, two types of solution categories that was identified. So we have to focus on the employees as well as with the top management in order to mitigate this risk. Okay, and the second is the security architecting. So several kinds of solution categories, including employees, security architecture, and top management. So these should be adapted in order to mitigate with this strategy. And the third one is the application architecting, which it composed of 7 kinds of solutions uh, that focuses on the employees, top management, application architecture, and technology architecture. For the data architecting, we need to mitigate it by focusing on the employees, top management, and implementation process. For the system decommission, we should focus on the solution categories of employees, top management, and system. While for project scoping, there are 4 kinds of solution categories. We have the top management, the employees, and the project scope definitions. And lastly is the vendor relationship. So the vendor related solution category was adopted in order to mitigate this strategy element. Okay, so we now move on to the conclusion of this case study. So basically, this research verified that the architecture board can control the solutions with the resilience architecture model, the STRMM model for digital transformation in areas of cloud, mobile IT, and specific application layer on cloud or mobile IT, such as the big data solution. They have concluded as well that it clarified the strategy elements to mitigate the risk for digital transformation, such as the role assignments, security architecting, application architecting, data architecting, system decommission, and project scoping. Yeah, so that's all of my presentation.